Hello! Earlier this year, I reviewed the 2004 adaptation of Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South. There is another adaptation from 1975, which I had never seen before. Somebody told me last week that it is up on YouTube, so, I decided, why not check it out, and so this is my review of that 1975 BBC production. The way I'm going to review it is partially how it stands on its own, but also how it relates to Elizabeth Gaskell's book, and how it relates to the 2004 movie. So it's kind of a review, it's kind of a comparison, because I have a feeling that's what a lot of you want to know. How does it compare to those two things? So, without much further ado, yes, this is a 4-hour television miniseries from 1975. There are basically two things you need to know about this adaptation. Number one, the most notable thing about it, I guess, its distinguishing feature, is that it stars Patrick Stewart as John Thornton. So, all Patrick Stewart fans, this is something for you to get excited about. And the second thing that you should know is that this version follows the book very closely. If you have read the book, then you will recognize this from pretty much the first second of watching. If you haven't read the book, then, well, it's gonna be a bit different if you are only familiar with the 2004 version. Yeah. 2004 shakes things up quite a bit. This is part of the age when the BBC was adapting everything, all the books, and doing it in a way that's a little bit stiff, a little bit stagey, very classic. I especially notice in this version, in this particular adaptation, that there's a shortage of exterior shots and scenes compared to 2004, where there's so much of the outdoors. You don't have that with this. It's very much, here's one room, here's another room, now we're in this other room. I don't want to make it sound like it's stodgy and dull, though, because it's not really. The scenes move very quickly. It's a rapid-fire show. It keeps you from getting bored in the in-between moments by just going from basically one conversation to another and very little pausing in between. There isn't any incidental music or anything. It's just flying right along. Sometimes it moves a little too fast because you might not pick up on the fact that 6 months have gone by. So I'm going to talk about the characters now, starting with Margaret Hale, our protagonist, who is played by Rosalind Shanks, who I did not recognize. I don't think I'm familiar with her name. The most notable thing to me about the way her Margaret was portrayed is that this Margaret is very snobby. Right from the beginning, it's not just when she arrives in Milton. It starts when she's back at Helston from London. She doesn't want her mom inviting her mom. That sounds wrong. She doesn't want her mother inviting people to come for dinner who are tradespeople because she doesn't want to associate with people like that. And yet, on the other hand, she is a revolutionary thinker from the very start, and she wants to circulate among the village people and have them be her friends and companions. And so it's like, anyone who's in my class and anyone who's in the very lowest class, they're okay, but anyone in that middle section, anyone who's from the lower classes trying to better themselves, I don't want anything to do with them. And that made her a little less likable, I thought. I will talk more about Margaret a little bit later on when I talk about the ending. But now I'm going to move on to Mr. Thornton. Let's face it, there is no way anyone is going to compare to Richard Armitage as John Thornton, because Richard Armitage as John Thornton is pretty much one of the best things ever. But I tried to be fair. I tried to just view this performance on its own. He's played by Patrick Stewart, who is certainly the most famous person in this entire cast. The truth is, I just didn't like him as much in this role. I didn't find... He didn't make my little heart pitter-patter like Richard Armitage, okay? He talks super fast in some moments, like 50 words in 5 seconds, and they sometimes came out in a kind of bark. Like, his delivery was kind of harsh, even when he was speaking tenderly, and it was a put-off. There is no beating, which is as it was in the book. There's no violent beating of a worker for smoking. He does seem pretty scornful of his workers. The line about the workers rejecting the wheel because it will make them hungry, that is said by someone else in the 2004 version, but Thornton himself says it in this version, and that makes him seem rude, kind of pompous, and very scornful, not likable in that moment. One thing that I really liked was that they showed scenes of him having lessons with Mr. Hale, and it really showed the development of the friendship between the two men, and it showed Thornton's appreciation for education, not just as a stepping stone for him and his family on the social ladder. Stepping stone, social ladder, I feel like that's a mixed metaphor. But it showed that he has a love for the classics and for learning and for the sentiments that Homer depicts. Especially, that seemed like they talked about the Iliad the most. And that he has a desire for this. He hungrily seeks it out. I thought there was a pretty stark contrast between the depiction of the Thornton family between the two versions. In the 2004 version, they are of the merchant class, but they do all right. They present well. They have pulled themselves up to a certain level in society. In 1975, they've built themselves up financially, but they've only gotten so far. They have the money, but they don't have the class. John is still pretty coarse. He's very much business, business, business. He's brusque. In the 2004 version, his mother, Mrs. Thornton, is a hard woman, a severe woman, but there's something graceful about her. I think maybe a lot of that has to do with Sinead Cusack's performance, that there is something striking about her. In 1975, she's a very pinched, very sour woman. There isn't so much of a closeness between her and her son, not much affection, and she doesn't seem to make as much of a social effort. But moving on from the Thorntons, I'm just going to say a little bit about the other characters. Nicholas Higgins and Bessie are very much like they were in the book, which is both good and bad. Linguistically, I think they were on the nose. He is not so hot-tempered as I find him in the 2004 version, but he's also not as smart. I did come to like him eventually, but he's not as engaging. I did think it was interesting that they paint Boucher as the starter of the riot, the instigator of violence. I did like that scene when they all come into the mill and Thornton actually comes out and faces them off. He makes them back away from him. He walks amongst them. That was a pretty good scene. Who else? Here's an interesting little bit of trivia for you. Frederick Hale, the brother, is played by Tim Pigott-Smith, who played the father, Mr. Hale, in the 2004 version. And when he showed up, my mom and I were like, wait a minute, isn't that? And it was. I don't have much to say about him because he's in it so little. Henry Lennox is in this, but a lot less. And I actually found him more likable, less creepy. Margaret just comes right out and friend zones him at least twice And oh, it was so blunt. I actually felt bad for him. Aunt Shaw and Cousin Edith, not likable at all. The aunt is so snobby. She's also kind of a domineering woman. Mr. Hale, I don't know why I left them to the end. Mr. Hale was okay. I can't really complain about anything in his portrayal. He seemed very weak, but we do see his love of learning and his brokenness over everything that happens was very effective. Mrs. Hale seemed kind of strong, stronger than she was in 2004, at least until she gets to Milton. And then Mr. Bell, our good friend Mr. Bell, no plaid pants. He's such a minor character. He doesn't show up until the last episode, and he basically functions just to, well, you know what happens to him. So that covers the characters. Now for the ending. I genuinely felt like the union between John and Margaret was pretty unlikely. For one thing, I didn't see much evidence of Margaret changing how she felt about him. There weren't the heights of violent dislike in the first half, so there wasn't this huge antagonism between them, I guess, for her to get over. But she definitely didn't like him. She disdained him. So because I didn't really see any evidence of why she suddenly changed her mind, it didn't make any sense for it to end that way. There's also the fact, though, that I'm skeptical of their future happiness because of the way things stand with the mother. At least in the other version, we see Margaret having a conversation with his mother by themselves in the closed-up mill, and you kind of get the feeling that Margaret is trying to reach out to her, and so that kind of gives you hope for the future of their relationship. There's no such scene in the 1975 version, so it just ended kind of lamely. It was kind of weak, kind of unconvincing, and it certainly didn't pack a punch like the 2004 version does, which is basically how I feel about this version overall. I have to wonder if things would have been different if I had read the book first, if I had grown up watching the 75 version, if that was all there was, and then I saw the 2004 version, would I have been bothered by its deviations? Because generally I'm a person who feels like you have to cling to the version that's most faithful. But in this case, I feel like this is an example where faithful isn't necessarily superior. So that's my review of the 1975 version of North and South. It does the job, it's okay, but there's something lacking. And there's a good chance it'll make you want to go and watch the 2004 version again. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Thanks for watching. Bye!